In Hong Kong this week comes to you from Nong Shan Chau, or Stonecutters Island.
We're going to be spending an entire day on the island looking around this well-known but little visited spot. We'll be looking at the island's past, present, and future, and meeting some of the people who know it best.
Katie Ledger will report on the island's unique environment. Sue will be delving into its history, while I'll be finding out what the coming few years will bring.
We begin, though, with Eve Lamb, and her report centers on the only people who actually live and work on Stonecutters, the British Armed Forces. Have a nice day. We did.
Stonecutters is home to the ammunition sub-depot, the 415 Maritime Troop of the Gurkha Transport Regiment, and the headquarters of the Hong Kong Military Service Corps. About 80 people, mainly British soldiers and their families, live on the island. And although it is off-limits to the general public, one sure way of getting on the island is to join the HKMSC.
Well, the Hong Kong Military Service Corps is an organization of 1,100 full-time British soldiers who happen to be Chinese, and they happen to spend most of their service life in Hong Kong. Stonecutters Island is their training depot, and we recruit them here from the streets and from the schools, and we train them here. You've seen some of them in training. We send them, once they're trained, from here to 27 different employing units throughout Hong Kong.
This time around, there are 67 of them, with the youngest at 17 and the oldest 10 years his senior. They've been here only 3 weeks and are just beginning their grueling training.
It's a 21-week course, and during that time they'll cover everything from, obviously, the physical training side, the purely military side, such as shooting, weapon handling, and drill. They'll also spend a fair amount of their time doing education. They'll cover first aid, basic signals, and minor military tactics.
The assault course is an essential part of military training. It may look like a lot of fun, but hey, it wasn't. Under normal circumstances, their military career can last up to 22 years before they're back to civilian life. With 1997 just around the corner, their military career will be drastically shortened. Under these circumstances, it's a bit surprising that anyone still wants to join.
Although we won't offer them a long-term military career, what we will offer is a start off into a second career. This stage is the reason why a lot of them are joining.
That's what the major thinks. I got somewhat of a different impression from the recruits.
My ambition is to be a soldier, and I can develop a sense of discipline and team spirit. Exciting, and maybe challenge me to be a very strong man, so I can get stronger for everything.
Everything? What do you mean by everything? What do you want to be stronger for?
The first point, I can save my girlfriend later, or save my family.
I don't know how useful that will be, but I guess living in Hong Kong, one never knows. For the time being, these fresh recruits are sweating it out on the field. This is the present, but what about the past?
When the British first acquired Stonecutters in 1861, they immediately set about building the first civil prison on the territory. At that point in time, the crime rate was extraordinary. But it was, in fact, a prison that was never actually used as a prison. You see, most of the prisoners were kept off in hulks while the prison was being completed. They simply jumped overboard and escaped. So very little remains of that structure today. This is one of the old main prison walls, and this one of the old watchtowers. It is now used as an HKMSC settlement office. The other watchtower that survived has been turned into a sweet little church, St. Barbara's Church. St. Barbara is, appropriately, the patron saint of gunners and the Ordnance Corps. Under the guiding hand of Colonel Illingworth, St. Barbara's Church recently had a facelift done on her aging interior. The main prison gate building remains, and it has proved to be a suitable accommodation for the HKMSC headquarters. With the failure of the prison scheme, the British then turned Stonecutters into a rehab and quarantine center for smallpox victims. Then in 1874, Typhoon Rose struck, and in her wake, she left very few buildings standing. Now, this is, in fact, the only grave that is known to be on Stonecutters. Chances are there are others, but it is the grave of the Inspector of Police Anningson, who succumbed to smallpox in 1871 at the age of 26.
I'd really be quite interested to know why a young man would want to come to what must have been in those days a pretty godforsaken place and intend to spend his entire life there. What sort of thought processes he must have gone.
Right. Well, I've got my boots on. Why don't we go for a historical romp around Stonecutters?
Let's go for a romp.
Which way, sir? This way. Even in military circles, there isn't too much known about Stonecutters. Most of the photographs and records were destroyed during the war. Before he leaves his post this year, the colonel is determined to pen a history of the island, one of the many legacies he will leave behind. But for now, the remainders of the past that have survived must speak for themselves, such as the Western Battery, one of the 6 gun emplacement sites on the island, when it was an island.
Well, this is Western Battery. It was the first battery that was built on Stonecutters Island. And it was started building in 1887, having been decided in 1878 they were going to build a gun battery on Stonecutters Island to look after the western approaches of Hong Kong Harbour. And they put 2 64-pounders on here originally. It was then developed as the war came on. And it remained in service through until really right up until 1941, when on the 10th of December 1941 it was bombarded very heavily by the Japanese, received 41 direct hits. One of them was just round the corner, we'll have a look at it in a minute, and was eventually on that same day, on the 11th of December, together with all of the rest of the 5 other batteries here on the island, it was abandoned, and the crews moved over to Hong Kong Island as part of the defence plan.
Most of the emplacements on the island were filled in, though extensive underground work still exists, like this one, which places us 30 feet under the ground. So, Colonel, this will be part of a whole network of tunnels?
Yes, we've got 4 tunnels here in Western Battery, and we're about 30 feet underground now, and in order to get, the gun positions are just above us, and in order to get the ammunition from here, in the storage part of the tunnels, up to the gun position, they needed some system to get it up there. So they had these ramps. Now this is one that is left of a series of ammunition lifts that took the ammunition up to the gun position itself. One for the shot and one for the powder just behind us. Sadly, they're in a bad state of repair, but we're hoping very much to renovate them and put them back.
Sure, but it is a true relic from the war.
It is? Oh, yes. Yep. And it hasn't been touched since. It's been broken up a bit, sadly.
Right, and in terms of giving us an idea of how expansive the tunnels are, how far could we go back if we were to walk? I understand it's unsafe. But...
Yes, it is unsafe at the moment. The spring rains messed it up last year. But this tunnel system here is about 600 yards round. It comes out where we were looking at the bomb damage earlier on. Right. And there's an identical one above it, which serviced the 2 layers of guns that were on the side of this hillside.
I see. Well, personally, I prefer the sunshine.
Let's go back out.
The gun emplacements proved to be of very little strategic value. It's quite a shame when you consider the work involved in getting the batteries properly outfitted. This pathway was blasted out of rock, and 1 steel ring remains. It testifies to the pulley system that was used to transport the artillery up to the battery. As we descend down the hill, we pass the old military hospital used during the 20s as we proceed to Geisha House Hill. During the Japanese occupation of Stonecutters during the war, they primarily used the island as a place, well, for a bit of R&R. At the site where the water tank now is, Japanese soldiers took over a clubhouse that was here to entertain themselves in the company of several young geisha women. Out of this circumstance arose a particularly intriguing ghost story.
There is a particularly famous story for those of us on the island, in that it was always thought that this site here was haunted. And it was haunted, apparently, by the spirit of a particularly lovely geisha girl who refused the advances of the visiting chief of the Imperial General Staff from Japan. And he got fed up eventually with all her procrastinations. And she was eventually executed. Now, the story goes that she was executed because she refused his advances. In fact, there was an execution here in Hong Kong of a young lady, but it was in fact because she was spying against the Japanese.
Virtually the only trace of the Japanese presence is this ghost story. The colonel says that even he does not visit Geisha House Hill at night, for fear, no doubt, of running into the wandering, sad soul of the young executed woman. The ammunition sub-depot cannot claim to have any ghosts, but it is so steeped in military secrecy that we probably wouldn't know anyway. Photography is strictly prohibited, so we could only step within a few yards of the gate. It is here that the last Sikh unit within the British Army are based, employed as police guards. Tarath Kanwal Singh has been with the Army Depot Police for over 41 years. Now, this makes him Stonecutters' oldest resident. Can you explain why Sikhs were initially enlisted into the British Army?
Sikh are the non-smoking force. And before 1949, there were a couple of hazardous fires on the island. And Pakistanis were employed on the island in the police. And the fires were due to their own smoking. So the authorities were looking to replace them. And they found Sikhs in transit in Hong Kong from China. So they offered them a job, and Sikhs accepted the job.
And it is, of course, against your religion to smoke, period.
It is against my religion to smoke.
The depot was added in the mid-30s. The oldest building on the island, however, and perhaps in all of Hong Kong, is this one. Built in 1860 as the old prison canteen, it is now, undoubtedly, the most delightful officers' mess in the territory. Like the mess building, these two colonial structures have also survived down the ages. For the past residents of these buildings, it was a simple walk down to the, well then, clean beach for a morning dip. Stonecutters was then an island truly unto itself. From the first Hakka residents chipping away at granite, to the prison builders, to the smallpox victims, the Japanese, and now the British, Stonecutters has stood the test of time. The future? Well, that's a whole different story.
Welcome back to the show. Now, here's a clue in case it has slipped your mind over the last couple of minutes. We are, of course, on Stonecutters Island this week, having a very military sort of episode. Now, the other guys are doing all sorts of sweaty, yomping exercises around the island, but not me. No, I'm no mug. Instead, I'm going to sit here and enjoy a cold ale and tell you about the movies, or in particular, one movie, a Western. Remember them? I do, and I used to rather like them. I also thought they'd disappeared forever. And then, of course, Clint Eastwood came along. The man who brought us great Westerns like 1970s outlaw Josie Wales has come up with another one for his latest film. It's called Unforgiven. The critics love it. It's already won awards. It's a strong Oscar candidate, and I think I can see why.
William Money takes up his gun.
Unforgiven represents a blend of the old and the new, echoes of great westerns from Alan Ladd through to Sergio Leone, and it's also a story for our times. Eastwood portrays a legendary gunfighter who settled down, married, found religion, and even started raising pigs in Kansas. Now, he's abruptly called back into action, though, when a prostitute is abused in the wild old town of Big Whiskey, and a brash young would-be gunfighter seeks vengeance. It ain't quite as easy as all that, though, as Eastwood and company have to battle wicked Sheriff Gene Hackman and also the vagaries of old age. Yes, it's one of those westerns. Sometimes they can't even get onto their horses and not even shoot straight, I suppose. It's not a spoof, though. It's a very serious, contemplative, ironic piece of work. Eastwood directs with his usual economy, and the supporting performances are brilliant, from Eastwood, of course, to Morgan Freeman as his buddy, Gene Hackman as the sheriff, and Christopher Harris in a completely over-the-top role. It's a great movie, Unforgiven, one that stands out from the pack. Not, mind you, that the pack of movies around town these days is all that bad. The Last of the Mohicans has finally opened to replace Dracula. There's a new one called Consenting Adults, which stars Kevin Kline in a yuppie psycho thriller about just how seriously wrong wife-swapping can go. And finally, a little gem from Australia called Strictly Ballroom. Young people falling in love, dancing in a ballroom, and generally making this one of the best date movies in a long time. Well, that's about it from me at the movies. I think I'll get on with a hard life and see what Katie's been up to.
You take it easy there, John. Now, this whole island is like a virtual wildlife reserve, and it's home to over 50 different species of bird, including one of the largest winter roosts of black kites in the world. The island's surrounded by millions of fish, and it also has loads and loads of snakes, which the Japanese used during their occupation for research purposes.
To walk around this island with its lush vegetation and beautiful flowering trees, you could be forgiven for thinking that this was as near to paradise as Hong Kong could offer. And obviously the thousands of egrets, kingfishers, drongos, strikes, herons and cormorants all seem to agree as they've made this haven their home. But for one species, the black kite, Stonecutters is a very special place. So says David Melville from the World Wildlife Fund for Nature.
It's the main roosting area for birds at night time. Birds which spread out over more or less the whole territory, then fly back in towards the harbour in the evening, and we get huge spirals of birds coming up over the island before they come down to rest in the trees at night. We have in midwinter somewhere in the region of 1,000 or so kites in Hong Kong. Normally there's about 700 on the island here, and then the rest mostly over on Hong Kong Island around the peak.
But Stonecutters is not just a residential home for some of our feathered friends. Many more from overseas use it as a stopover, a hotel even, for various times of the year.
The majority of bird species found in Hong Kong are migrant species. In fact, only something like 70 out of the over 400 species are resident breeding species. So Stonecutters is visited by a lot of migrants during the course of a year. Some of these are birds like the flycatchers and thrushes, which we can find in the woodlands during the winter and spring and autumn migrations. And then the coasts of the island, and again the bays like this, often attract quite a variety of shorebirds, particularly during the spring migration.
It's hard to believe that I'm standing on the very spot where last year there was a virtual ecological disaster. During the reclamation work for Terminal Number 8, Stonecutters Island was joined to Kowloon, and the resulting channel that formed was a large pool of stagnant black water. Days later, millions of dead fish were washed up on this shore.
They noted that it was essential that the channel between Stonecutters and the container terminal should not be closed off until sewage coming in from the West Kowloon area had been diverted away from the bay. Timetabling of different projects run by different government departments wasn't adequately knitted together to make sure that everybody was working to the same timetable, and the result was we closed the channel so that the flushing effect of the water coming through from Rambler Channel ceased. The sewage still came into the bay, the oxygen dropped, and the fish died. It could have been predicted, it should have been predicted, and it should have been avoided.
It's difficult to avoid all the construction in progress, but the island still has that unmistakable quality of being totally untampered. The bushes run wild and certain areas resemble jungle. But what of the future for the wildlife and the environment here?
The gently shelving beach that we've got here now, which is so very attractive, particularly as a feeding site for herons and egrets, is going to disappear. Reclamation will come in, and we'll then end up with a vertical concrete sea wall all around the edge, which is good for shipping but useless for birds, of course. This is going to impact probably quite severely on the heron and egret colony, which is down on the main centre part of the island in the trees there. We've got over 100 pairs, mostly of night herons, but also some other egret and heron species nesting there. And they've been largely feeding in this bay area here. The south shore of the island will, at the moment at least, be left undeveloped. But that is a more disturbed shoreline. It's also steeper and seems generally to be less attractive to the birds than the north shore has been. It's not really possible to predict whether the birds will move over to the south shore, or if not, it seems likely that they'll just have to abandon Stonecutters as a breeding site.
Today, with the work on the new dock area just about to start, the future for the wildlife all over Stonecutters looks decidedly grim. But even though the conservation message has been seen, has it really been heard? Well, let me introduce you to somebody who's always seen and can definitely be heard, Paul George.
No man is an island entire unto himself, said the poet, and I'm afraid to say that Stonecutters Island is no longer an island entire unto itself. I'm standing here now on the very front line where Stonecutters Island, as was, meets the PADS, Port and Airport Development Strategy Land Reclamation Project. And it's staggering to think that until 2 years ago, where you see that fence just down there, was the middle of a gently sloping sandy beach. Well, that's the past, but what of the future?
One of the people best placed to tell us about that is the new naval base on Stonecutters Island, project manager David Salter. But this being a defence matter, and one fraught with political and security considerations, 1997 and the PLA are coming, remember, I did have to be slightly circumspect in my choice of questions. All this happened.
Well, I think it's been published, but I think it would be most appropriate if you addressed that question to Hong Kong government. They're building it and they're paying for it.
Well, that question referred to how much the naval base is going to cost. And after a little dredging through the press, I came up with a figure of $356 million. And that was on the front page, so you see what I mean. What about the communication facilities on the new base?
The security question, there's no way I can answer that sort of question. It's security, it's classified equipment, and the question is inappropriate.
Well, so much for my brief career as a spy. An amiable man, Lieutenant Commander Salter, but a canny one too. After a quick check on the Official Secrets Act, I tried again with what I hoped was a fairly innocuous sort of query. Why move the base from Hong Kong side to Stonecutters side?
Really at Hong Kong government's request. The Central Wan Chai reclamation has been planned for several years now, and it would finish up ultimately with the present Tamar site about 200 yards inland. And of course, it's not a good place to run a naval base for. So an alternative site was identified on the land right over behind us now.
It seems, from where we stand, that this base will only be around for 4 years, is it? 4 years. Doesn't that rather upset you that you build this gorgeous new place and then...
On the face of it, yes. The plans for this, actually, the basin is starting to get very, very much busier. Just a very short time ago, the contract has just been let to start further reclamation work within this basin. And the Hong Kong government dockyard will be relocated down this side and across the south of this basin. Work started, well, it hasn't started yet, but the contract is let and we expect it at any time. That is to relocate the Hong Kong government dockyard from its present position in Canton Road in Tsim Sha Tsui over to here. And that should be finished by the end of next year. By the time we get to 1997, at the present, the outline plan is that the naval base will be absorbed into the government dockyard so that all the facilities that we need for our ships will then be taken over by the government dockyard. And their design of their base is in fact taking into account the facilities that will be taken over on the other side. So all of this basin by June 1997 will be the Hong Kong government dockyard on all three sides.
So now you know. One thing more you should know. When you're asking a serving British military officer sensitive political or security-related questions, there are times when you should be grateful if you don't receive an answer at all.
That's getting really out of court, that. And if I gave you the answer to that question, I'd have to shoot you.
Oh dear. Not getting anywhere, am I?
Time to go. We don't want to overstay our welcome. We would like to thank all those involved in the show for giving their time and effort so unstintingly. Although the public aren't allowed onto Stonecutters in normal circumstances, every other year the British Armed Forces hold an open day. Only trouble is, the next one's in 1994.
See you there, and we'll also see you next week for more Eye on Hong Kong. Bye.